Hi guys, good evening everybody and welcome. Welcome to our event. I'm Luba Troyanovsky, President of JFCS Board of Directors. Even though we cannot be in the same room tonight together, it is wonderful to see all of your faces and be reminded of the strength of our community. I would like to thank each and every one of you for your leadership, commitment, and coming together to do so much good in this difficult time of crisis. Tonight's program will include the agency update from JFCS Executive Director, Dr. Anita Friedman, and a presentation by Dr. and Rabbi Daniel Gordis, and then opportunity to ask questions. Dr. Gordis is a noted speaker, an amazing writer and commentator, especially on relationship of American and Israeli Jews. I know we're looking forward to hear Dr. Gordis speak shortly, but before we get to his presentation, I would like to introduce my friend, my mentor, our amazing executive director, Dr. Anita Friedman. Anitachka, please fill us in.
Okay, thank you.
Status.
Okay, thank you, Lubachka. And Dobry вечер, everybody. Welcome. I'm so happy to see all of you. It's great for us to get together in this way at this moment, and we have a lot to discuss. We've gone through a lot in the last few months. We have a lot more to go through, but I want to thank everyone for your extraordinary support, your involvement. In the last few months, as you know, since we've been in lockdown here, and there's been a pandemic around the world, and we're looking forward to hearing from Yana Gordis about the situation in Israel. We have risen to the occasion, as we should as a community. We're serving thousands of people right now who are in trouble. As many of you know, we're serving a lot of elderly, especially people who are alone, who need care in their own homes. They need medical care, they need home care, they need food. We have expanded our services to provide food to all the counties that we serve. As many of you know, in some places going from 100 families a week to 1,000, 1,200 families a week, mostly people who are suddenly unemployed. We're providing a lot of mental health services and counseling and support to parents and to children. And we're providing a lot of financial aid also in the form of grants and loans. So if you or somebody you know needs help, you should get in touch with us so we can be there for them, because under these circumstances, we will make sure that nobody in our community is abandoned and left alone. We've been doing an outstanding job also because we have hundreds of new volunteers who are helping us with phone calls to people, with delivering food to people every single day. We've had probably 500 new volunteers in addition to our 2,000 existing volunteers, mostly young people who want to help. So that's a great tribute to this community. And of course, people have been providing more money, which is critical. Financial aid and support is absolutely essential at this time of need. So in some ways, this is going to be, I think, our community's really finest hour. And we're working closely with all the other communities, also with the other faith communities, with the other communities throughout the Bay Area, with government, both in the local and the state and the national level, to coordinate our efforts and to move us forward. And of course, we're working closely with all the other Jewish communal organizations, the JCCs, that are struggling with how to move forward with the schools, with all the other institutions that are serving the community. And we can just feel very proud because anyone who needs help is going to get it at this particular moment. And you're making that possible. So I know that each of you understands why it's important for our community to be there for each other, especially at this time. And I just want to thank you. I'm very proud to represent JFCS at this time. And I'm especially proud to welcome Danny Gordis with us tonight. I was thinking about calling this the Dr. Danny Gordis Cocktail Hour. And I actually prepared a little vodka here with lime for that purpose. So
Should have told us.
hi, everybody. I know most of you probably have a drink someplace. You just don't want to show it. But it's a little early in Israel to start the cocktail hour. It's probably what, 6 o'clock?
We got coffee.
Coffee.
Yeah, but never too early to have a little schnapps, huh, Danny? So welcome.
It's early.
Most of us know you very well. You've been with us before. You're a great friend of our community. You were here recently with some of our leadership. We have here with us tonight among the most devoted, interested, involved, engaged, hardworking lay leadership of the community. And we're very, very proud to have that kind of leadership as part of our organization. And we're glad to be working with you. We want you to brief us about the situation in Israel. Everyone knows that you're an extraordinary thinker and leader and voice on behalf of Israel. One of our good friends who also was with us at one of our galas, Alan Dershowitz, describes you as one of Israel's most thoughtful observers. And of course, many of us have your books. I happen to have here many of your books. One of the books that we like the most that many of us received that we gave to a lot of our leadership is this book, called "We Stand Divided," which was described by Ambassador Michael Oren as essential reading if you want to understand the U.S.-Israel relationship. We've been working together on many different levels, including with Jewish Family and Children's Services, because you, in your capacity as Senior Vice President of Shalem College, which is Israel's preeminent liberal arts college and a real forward-thinking institution in important to Israel's future, we have an exchange relationship. And when those top students come every year to learn and study the American Jewish community, they always come and study with staff and lay leaders at Jewish Family and Children's Services. So on many different levels, we have a very strong working relationship. So we're very pleased to have you as our friend, and we're very pleased to welcome you to be with us today, Danny. So we'd like you to share your remarks about the situation in Israel right now. As an insider and as an observer, we also want to talk about the U.S.-Israel relationship, and then we'll take some time for questions at the end, maybe 15 minutes or 20 minutes of questions. So welcome, and share some of your thoughts with us, Danny.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Anita. It's good to see so many familiar faces on the screen, and to see some new faces as well, who I hope I'll get a chance to meet when we get back to actually moving around the globe once again and can see each other and be in each other's communities. I know that I speak for all of us when I say that it's really an honor to have Anita as a friend and a partner and a teacher and a mentor. Even from here all the way across the ocean, her reputation as someone who combines pathos and love and care for people, but along with incredible smarts and institutional knowledge. That reputation is everywhere, whether it's on the APAC board in DC or the work that she does in your local community, or really countless other efforts that she's involved in. I know that we all feel it's a gift to have you, Anita, as our friend and our teacher. So thank you for that. Thank you for your years of friendship with me personally, and thank you for inviting me to do this. It's really a wonderful, wonderful opportunity, and I'm really grateful and honored. So let me just start out by saying something about how I think this virus and the whole pandemic is playing out in Israel and what it's teaching us about Israel, what it's teaching us a little bit about the world, and how this is going to potentially impact the American-Jewish relationship. And I think it is going to be a challenge, which we're going to have to figure out how to manage and how to adjust to. By way of explaining this, I think what I would say is that what the pandemic has done, and we've seen this everywhere, and you're fully as aware of this as I am, what the pandemic has done is that in many cases, it has highlighted or accelerated processes that were already underway. In other words, much of what we're seeing is simply a kind of an intensification of processes that were going on before. I'll give you a couple of examples. Take online shopping, right? I mean, there were a lot of people in the younger generations, and probably many people in this group, who were doing a lot of their shopping online, even from groceries and fruit to certainly clothing and whatever. And there were certain people who decided that's just not for me. I don't do that. I don't like it. I like to go into the store or whatever. Well, all those people, of course, are now doing online shopping. And it's not clear how many of them are going to be able to go back to what they were doing before. So it was a process that was already happening. It's just been accelerated. Take the whole WeWork phenomenon, whether it's specifically WeWork or any of the other companies that make kind of shared office space available. It was much more pronounced in a younger generation, kids in their 20s and 30s mostly using it. But now, obviously, all of the businesses that many of us are involved in are working pretty well offline. And clearly, it's obvious to many, many business leaders It's an interesting question. Why do I rent those thousands and thousands of square feet of office space when this more or less works? And the implications of that for office configurations, the implications of that for real estate and so forth are going to be very profound. Now, that's kind of on the economic level, and you know more about that than I do. But I wanted to use that as a way of simply showing you how things that were already starting have just been accelerated. The pandemic has also highlighted, kind of put a light and a magnifying glass on certain social phenomena that were already underway. And I think here, by the way, it's actually very interesting and important and sad in certain ways to point to the radical differences between the ways this has played out in Israel and the way that this has played out in the United States. So I'm sure you're aware, because you're all deeply involved, and this is all available in the American English-speaking press, but Israel so far, and everything here is so far, and everybody is aware that we could have a second wave, and there are no guarantees in this business. But Israel is so far handling this pandemic exceedingly successfully. Every single day, the number of people who are on ventilators goes down. A couple of weeks ago, it was at 98, which I think was our peak. We never had 100 people, if I'm not mistaken, on ventilators. We now have 50 as of this morning. The number of new cases in a country of approximately just shy of 10 million people is, 15 a day, 20 a day, and so on and so forth. So we have really flattened the curve, whereas unfortunately, tragically, in the United States, that has yet to happen in certain places. Certain cities are actually showing tremendous progress, thank God, but there are other places where the story is really much less uplifting and much more frightening. And why has that been the case? I mean, obviously, Israel had no particularly obvious leg up on this. I mean, Israel has great medical care, but America has phenomenal physicians and nurses and medical practitioners. Israelis have smart people in their government, and Americans have very smart people in all kinds of places in the national and the local level. So what's happened here? So I think, first of all, what we've seen, despite the fact everybody loves to talk about how divided a society Israel is, this party, that party. Even last night, we were supposed to swear in our government, and we kind of never got around to it because there was a little brouhaha inside the Likud party about who had gotten which portfolios, and all of a sudden, last night's swearing in has now become Sunday swearing in, and it's only Friday morning here, and between Friday and Sunday, a lot can happen in Israeli politics. So who knows? So everybody loves to talk about those things and point to how divided a society Israel is. But Israel is actually not a divided society. It's a politically tumultuous society, but it's also a very united society. There is a sense of shared purpose here. There is a sense of shared enterprise. There is a sense among certainly the Jewish majority, and we'll get to the Haredim, who are of course Jewish, but usually not thought of as part of that majority, and the Arabs, who we'll come to in a second also. But among the non-Haredi and non-Arabs, the vast majority of the Jewish 80% or whatever it is, see this as really kind of the rebirth of the Jewish people on its ancestral homeland. And whether you're left or right, or rich or poor, or whatever the case may be, you see yourself as being privileged to be part of that process. And that has led, among other things, by the way, to a tremendous cooperation on the part of the Israeli population. Israelis were from the very outset here very compliant. Once again, the press loved to point to all the exceptions. The couple hundred people that got together at a funeral or at a wedding or at Lag BaOmer and Har Merom, a few thousand people got together and police had to arrest people. That all happened, and that's all real, and that's all definitely problematic. But it is the real exception to what was going on in Israel. We were told for a number of days we could not leave our houses. Not that you couldn't travel, not that you couldn't walk outside. You were not allowed to leave your house unless you were going to get medicine. That was basically it. So pharmacies were open, a few food stores were open, and the rest of this country was shut down. And I can tell you that looking out the windows from our house in 3 different directions, you just didn't see a soul. It was a ghost town. There was nobody outside. In ensuing weeks, Israel has really come back to much more of a normal, and traffic is back up, and unfortunately traffic accidents are back up, and the streets look fairly normal. But when Israelis were told what to do, they were fairly compliant. And that's really important to understand, because part of what we were basing ourselves on here is a national collective experience of national emergency, where you understand that there are people in charge And whether you love them or don't love them, they are the ones who are going to get the country through the crisis. And the country either has to work as one and get through, or is not going to work as one and is not going to get through. And so, again, some people here like Bibi, some people here don't like Bibi. Most people here think he's handled the crisis in quite an admirable way, and I'll come back to that more in a minute. But I think so. First of all, what the pandemic has highlighted is a tremendous sense of cohesiveness, actually, in Israeli society, not a sense of division. Now, where we see typically, and where certainly the American Jewish community is very aware of the lack of cohesion, is among the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredim particularly, and Israeli Arabs. What's amazing is that in a recent poll, 2 polls actually, more than 70% of Israeli Arabs said that they see themselves as part of Israel's national enterprise. In other words, of course, they call themselves Palestinian Israelis. Of course, they feel a tremendous affinity to Palestinians who don't yet have a state. And of course they do, that's their people. But they also, at the very same time, 70-something% in 2 separate polls said during this pandemic, they felt very much part of the larger Israeli project. That's a pretty amazing thing. We all know what the relationship between the Haredi community and the Israeli army has been. And it has been a testy, distrustful relationship for a very long time, in which the army was seen kind as the last place you would want your kid to serve, and therefore keep the army out of my face. But when Bnei Brak, one of the 2 largest Haredi communities in Israel, was really overrun by a horrible outbreak of the pandemic, and Israel did not have enough police officers in the country to send to all the communities that needed it, because we also forbade intercity travel. It was just shut down. You could not get on the highways. Think about it. That's unimaginable in America, that you would shut down the highways. But here the idea was, if we're going to get a hold of this thing, we're going to shut it down. And we shut it down, and people couldn't travel, which created, of course, its own set of complications, but it worked. But we didn't have enough police officers to both do that and to go in mass numbers into Bnei Brak. So we sent the army into Bnei Brak. Now, you have to kind of be a little bit inside the Israeli picture to understand how unbelievably cognitively dissonant that is. The army in Bnei Brak, you know, the army in the one institution that people in Bnei Brak really hate and see that they don't want their kid to have anything to do with, goes into Bnei Brak and saves Bnei Brak. Does what many of you are doing through JFCS and its related organizations, giving out food, giving out medicine, helping get people to centers, to hospitals, and so on and so forth. And relatively quickly into this process, the rabbinic leadership, you know, these are the men in black. These are the real guys with the beards and the payas and the black hats and the black coats. They were working very closely with completely secular army officers. And we were able to stop the pandemic in Bnei Brak. It's not completely gone, but it is very much under control. So in a lot of ways, this pandemic has, just like it's accelerated online shopping, just like it's accelerated certain trends in real estate, it has highlighted what I think is a real fundamental cohesiveness inside Israel, which we can actually be very, very, very proud of. Now, obviously, it's done the same thing in a different way in America. America is fundamentally, I think, a kind of a very much of a divided society these days. To give you an example, I mean, we all know that there are lots of people in America who are Democrats who really don't have a lot of friends who are Republicans, or any friends who are Republicans. And the same is true in the other direction. You're probably aware, and this, you can't make this stuff up, there are polls done in America of Democrats, what percentage of them would not want their kids to marry a Republican? And there are polls done in the states among Republicans. What percentage of them would not want their kids to marry Democrats? You can Google this later. I mean, this is real stuff. Real polling places actually track these numbers. There's nobody in Israel would do a poll to ask how many people in the Likud wouldn't want their kid to marry somebody from Labor or Meretz or Blue and White. People would look at you like you're completely nuts. And everybody in Israel, or virtually everybody in Israel, has good, close friends who find themselves aligned with different political parties. So I think if this pandemic has shown the fundamental cohesiveness of Israeli society, it is, as you know better than I, because you're living there and experiencing it every day, it is, it is pointing to the great polarization in American society. So that's one of the great differences. And each country, every country has its challenges. And I think that's really one of the one of the challenges that America clearly has. And our challenge, of course, is to continue this even after the sense of crisis and to maintain Israeli Arabs and Haredi sense of participation in the larger Israeli enterprise. Say one or two other quick things, then talk about the American-Jewish relationship with Israel, and then open it up for questions. One of the things that's also become very clear here is that our background as a startup nation helped us here tremendously. What do I mean by that? So first of all, what I mean is that there is a fundamental trust of science and data in Israel. There is no discussion in Israel of what the numbers are. The numbers are what the numbers are, and nobody on the right or the left is denying the legitimacy and the accuracy of those numbers. In the States, you saw the day before yesterday that the president is saying that the numbers are being dramatically over-reported, and Fauci and others are arguing that it's possible that the numbers are being dramatically under-reported. There have been widely conflicting, attitudes to all sorts of experimental treatments, some of which were a bit lunatic and some of which were much more serious, but may or may not work. We haven't had that here. In other words, there are epidemiologists, there are scientists, they opine, they stand next to Bibi Netanyahu when he makes his nightly, or now not anymore nightly, but regular TV appearances. Israelis have not had a discussion about, are these numbers real, are these numbers not real? Our dependence on data and this being a very science-focused society has really helped us here as well. In addition to which, of course, we've taken a lot of our technological edge and used it for our advantage. So for example, like the United States, we were very worried at the beginning that we were not going to have enough ventilators. Now, thankfully, the number of people who we had on ventilators, as I said before, never even reached 100 people. So we ended up having more than enough ventilators, but we didn't know that that was going to be the case. I mean, Bibi got on television every night and was saying to Israelis, if we don't beat this, there's going to be hundreds of thousands of Israelis who are going to die, and there are going to be tens of thousands of Israelis on ventilators, and we don't have tens of thousands of ventilators. So we got to get cracking. And among other things that happened was Israel Aircraft Industries, for example, stopped producing whatever it is that Israel Aircraft Industries produces and turned its production line into producing ventilators. So we were able, on a dime, to do what the United States has so far not done, which was to use that act which enables the government to command certain production lines to do certain kinds of things. Israel did do that. Ben Gurion University announced that it's developed a breath test, apparently the tests for COVID, which gives you an answer on the spot, which apparently is exceedingly accurate. I don't know anything about science, but people are taking science very seriously, and we've really been putting the Technion and a lot of other places with their cutting edge laboratories and science thinking to bear on all of this. So we are, I think, a much more unified society than people expected. We're a much more obedient society than people expected. People do not think of Israelis as obedient. But when push comes to shove, we are. We're not very good at standing in line at Disneyland. And we're not very good at boarding buses in an orderly fashion, or if you've ever flown El Al, we are not quite as organized as United Airlines, getting on, group one, group two. Israelis, everybody's group one. But, because everybody's got an uncle or a grandfather who was a great general, so of course they have to board first. So that's the part that's really obnoxious and annoying, and everybody hates it. But at the end of the day, when it really does matter, the vast majority of Israelis are exceedingly compliant and exceedingly obedient. One last difference between the way that the Israeli leadership has handled this and American leadership has handled this, and here I'll speak specifically about Bibi. And again, some people love him, some people hate him, and everybody, and nobody trusts him. Everybody agrees about that. Even the people that love him don't believe him, and even the people that hate him don't believe him, but some people just think that he's the right guy in the right place at the right time. By the way, many more Israelis think that than thought that 3 months ago. If there was an election tomorrow, he would run away with it. Not because people think he's not corrupt, not because people think he hasn't mishandled something, but he has shown himself to be the guy who under fire got it right. But it's also important to remember Bibi's background here. Bibi is a former commando, right? Bibi was a member of Sayeret Matkal. And I have a son who was actually here visiting us for the first time in months. We finally let him in the house yesterday because things have calmed down a little bit. And my wife wanted him to teach her how to make challah. So that was actually a COVID trumping consideration. The son knew how to make challah, and my wife had never really done it as well as she wanted. So he came over for a full day of challah making lessons. But this is a kid, he's 30 years old. He was in the army for just shy of 9 years. He was a commando. And he was an officer in one of these commando units. And over the course of years, you hear how they think. And basically they think, what's everything that could go wrong? Because the first and most important thing we have to worry about is we got to bring all the guys home. Even if we fail in our mission, everybody has to come home. So let's imagine everything that can go wrong and ask ourselves, how are we going to address that? Then we get to the second tier and third tier level things to consider. That's Bibi's attitude. Bibi's attitude was, let's assume that everything goes wrong. Bibi did not get on the television and say, this is nothing, it's the flu, it'll be 1 or 2 people. He got on television and said to Israelis, we're in trouble. We're being attacked. We're at war. And if we don't get this right, 100,000 Israelis in a country of 10 million people or less are going to die. And the hospitals are going to get overrun. And the funeral places are going to be too full. And the cemeteries are going to be packed. We have to get this right. And he believed it. It was clear that he was petrified. And because he got up and he was petrified, but in command at the same time, he really was able to get Israelis to be compliant and to toe the line. We'll see. The last point on this only is, that now everything here is pretty much opened up. Public schools are going back to full engagement on Sunday. There's a bit of debate about the trains. There's a bit of an argument still about the beaches, but most restaurants are open. Lots of things. Everything else is basically open these days, except for movie theaters and a couple of other things. Stadiums aren't open yet, et cetera, et cetera. But if you know anything about Israeli sports, that's not a great loss. But in any event, most everything here is open, and now the clock is ticking. Now we have to look 2-3 weeks ahead and see what the numbers look like. If we have a second wave, Bibi has already made it clear, we're going right back to lockdown. You're going to go back in your houses, and schools are going to close, and businesses are going to close. And while everybody here wants to rebuild the economy because we have the same misery out there economically that you do, everybody actually will go back to lockdown. Let me just say something about what I think this says about the potential challenges for the relationship of American Jews and Israel. And as you know from the conversations that I was blessed to have with you, actually Anita was kind enough to invite me to be with some of you. I think it was in November, if I'm not mistaken, at the beginning of November, Anita, when I came out to your community. We talked about this then, and I've written about it a little bit in the book. You're all aware that this is an ongoing challenge. I think it's going to be very interesting to see what the challenge COVID places on American Jewish relationships with Israel. And I'm going to tell you at least 2 ways in which I think it could be a very serious challenge and make the relationship even more problematic. Number one is we understand that America's having a hard time here. I mean, America's just really having a hard time as an American and a human being. It's tragic. I mean, the pictures, the stories are horrifying. I have a brother who lives in on the Upper West Side in New York, and I have a son who, until he fled a few weeks ago, was living in the Upper West Side of New York. And I hear the New York stories, and I have friends like you do who are healthcare providers in New York and in New Jersey. It's not pretty, and it's very, very sad. And of course, the economic misery is everywhere. I think in the eyes of many American Jews, Israel is going to come across as a country that did it right. Now, that's a great thing, but they are going to say 6 months ago, potentially, all these campaigns for Israel this, Israel that, Israel education, Israel defense, Israel diplomatic, telling Israel's story, etc. Why? I mean, look at us and look at them. They did okay, right? We're a country of 9 million people. We've had 292 deaths. So to make the math really easy, let's say we were 10 million people and we'd had 300 deaths. So basically, if we were 330 million people, then we should have had 300 times 33, which is basically what 9,900. We should have had we would have had less than 10,000 deaths. America would have had less than 10,000 deaths at our rate, but the numbers are somewhere between 80 and 100,000, depending on who you ask. So Americans are going to look at Israel and say, we're very grateful and we're happy that it came through okay, but why does Israel need us? I mean, Israel doesn't need us anymore. We have people here who are unemployed. We have people who are sick. We have people who didn't recover fully from COVID-19. We have people who lost their businesses. Is it really that important that we send money to Israel anymore the way that we used to? I think that's going to be one really important consideration. The other one is, and Anita pointed out, that we have delegations that come from America to Israel. And the Koret Foundation has been very generous in making it possible for us at Shalem to bring delegations both to the Bay Area to learn what a real thriving Jewish community looks like, and what's a JFCS, what's a Jewish Home for the Aging, what's a federation, what's a JCC, what do synagogues look like in America, because they're very, very different from what they look like in Israel and the functions that they play. And our kids come back from America deeply moved and deeply touched. I'll just give you one example. Today is Friday. Yes, I have no idea what day of the week it is any day anymore. I just know that Shabbat is the same as every other day, except without my computer. Other than that, I'm in the same place. I wear the same things. I actually put on a pair of pants for the Seder only because I just couldn't bring myself to go to the Seder in the same sweatpants or El Al pajamas that I've been wearing for 2 months. Though I have like 30 pairs of El Al pajamas, don't want to get me wrong. They were being rotated. But we're all wearing the same thing. The big question is, what should I wear to the living room today? But where the days blend into each other. But tonight in Israel, we're having a Kabbalat Shabbat that our students put on. And I know some of our supporters at Shalem are actually going to join us for this one. And you might be asking yourself, or maybe you're not, but I'll tell you anyway, why did Shalem students get together to do this religious and secular Kabbalat Shabbat Friday evening welcoming Shabbat together? Because they saw it in the Bay Area. I mean, literally, they came back from the Bay Area and they said, people across all these different religious divides cooperate in so many ways. Why can't we? And they started something that has actually become a real mainstay of the Shalem community. That's an example of the way in which sending people across the ocean to places like the Bay Area or Koret has also made it possible for us to send them to Washington. They see AIPAC, they see other Jewish organizations that are involved politically. It's changed everything for our students, and by implication, it'll change things for lots of other people over the course of time. And of course, we all know that young Americans coming to Israel on birthright or other kinds of missions has a huge impact on their lives. It is very possible that those trips are being shut down for a very long time. Because don't forget, the airlines, even if air travel does open up, and even if the airlines can figure out some way of getting people confident enough that they can, fly without becoming sick or whatever the case may be, airlines are not going to let anybody with COVID symptoms on the plane. That is very clear. Everybody's going to have their temperature measured. As these breath tests become more accurate, everybody's going to get a breath test. What happens if you're a birthright kid and you come to Israel, and let's say you don't get all that sick, but you just get enough sick that you can't get on a plane, and you're sick for 6 weeks? You're not going to be able to get home. So eventually you'll get home, and this isn't going to be a tragic case, but my own view of this is that travel between our two countries is going to be radically diminished for a very long time. And that is going to take away one of the major pipelines of cooperation and mutual understanding that we've been able to build. And I'll just end by saying that I think that makes the work that we do, each of us in our local communities, to engage people in the importance of the other community all the more important. We're definitely not going to be able, definitely is a strong word, but we are assuming that we're not going to be able to bring our annual group to the Bay Area in September. We'll put it later in the year when hopefully things will be more in control. But we're not going to wait until May or April or whenever we're able to do it to keep teaching our students about the extraordinary community that is American Jewish life. Even if we can't get them on that plane, that education has to happen. And we'll be working with Anita and her colleagues in your community to see what we can possibly do in the interim. By the same token, you're the community of people and you're the leadership of that community that's going to have to ask yourself, how do we keep American Jews invested in what is without question one of the great miraculous experiences of the Jewish people in the last 2,000 years, the rebuilding of the Jewish people in its ancestral homeland, even if we can't send young people to Israel as much as we used to, even if we ourselves can't go and visit Israel quite as quickly as we used to. I think it's going to take really concerted effort on the part of communal leadership on both sides to try to build those relationships, and quite frankly, to dial down our resistance to policies that we might not like. There are going to be certain things that American Jews are going to do that Israelis are going to think doesn't make sense. And my remark to Israeli leaders here is going to be, dial it down. You don't make choices for American Jews. They run their own community. Try to build bridges and build relationships. By the same token, I don't actually personally think that this annexation thing is anywhere near happening. Polls show that two-thirds of Israelis just don't think it's going to happen. So it may not happen. There's a lot of buzz, but there's much more buzz about it among the American Jewish community than there was in Israel. Israelis aren't really talking about it. because first of all, there's nothing that interesting about it. Nobody in Israel ever thought that Israel was going to give up the Jordan River Valley. And nobody ever thought you could keep the Jordan River Valley, but not have a corridor to get to the Jordan River Valley. So the highway from Jerusalem to Ma'ale Adumim to the Dead Sea, which is very controversial outside of Israel, inside Israel is not controversial at all. That highway is not going back. So we kind of see whether it happens or it doesn't happen. It's just changing sort of the international nomenclature that's being used about a reality that has been in place ever since Yitzhak Rabin of blessed memory outlined it 20 or 30 years ago. So it's become much more of an issue among American Jews than it has become here. But I would say even for American Jews, if Israel does go ahead and do it, our responsibility is not to, create this big outcry, because frankly, Israelis aren't interested in what anybody outside Israel thinks about their foreign policy. They're going to do what they think is good for their security. Our responsibility on both sides has to be to ask, how can we create dialogue and discourse, and how can our leaders become even more involved and more compelling to their lay communities in terms of expressing the importance of engagement, especially in an era when we can't get on planes and go have breakfast with each other, either at the Embarcadero or on Rehov Emek Rifaim. We just are going to have to overcome the absence of that air bridge right now by showing even more devotion, even more caring, even more loyalty to other parts of the Jewish world. Because at the end of the day, the Jewish world's going to rise and fall together, and we need to see this through so that we emerge on the other side as a very united Jewish people. So I said too much. I'll stop with that, and happy to open it up.
Great, thank you so much, Danny. That was really a great summary. I think people have a lot of questions about a lot of issues that you raised, plus other issues about the political situation and the security situation in the Middle East right now, U.S.-Israel relationship. So I'm going to just go to various questions, and everyone should share their questions, as Masha said, and we will basically take as many questions as we can. So first, I'd like to call on, let's see, I have questions coming. Yana Kalika, you there someplace?
Hi, Danielle. How are you?
There you are.
Hey.
Hi, Yana. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
So the question is, from your perspective, what are the fundamental differences in how American Jews and Israelis view community and connection to one another?
That's a great question. I'm just writing it down so I can, at my age, remember it. Look, on a certain level, I think that this pandemic has pointed out that no matter how different our communities and our societies might be, some of this human need is universal. I think all of us who are in lockdown, and I left AIPAC a day early in the beginning of March to come home and vote. I'm not sure that was really worth it, but in any event, I left AIPAC a day early to come home, and then the next day we were told to go into isolation. And more or less, my wife and I have been in this apartment since March 3rd. A couple of trips out, a couple of walks in the morning, but all the shopping is done online and all that. We've been locked down together for a very long time. And what we're discovering, of course, is actually that we still like each other, which is very good if you're going to be stuck together in a house for 2.5 months. But we're also discovering how desperate we are, and how many of our friends are also, for that human contact, just to have lunch with another couple, just to get together for drinks with another couple, not over Zoom, but around a table or in somebody's porch or in somebody's backyard. And I think we're seeing that that's really a very universal human experience. And in that, Americans and Israelis are really exactly the same. It's human, it's not national. But of course, what links Israelis together mostly is a sense of national enterprise. The vast majority of Israelis, again, leaving out the Arab community, leaving out the Haredi community, the overwhelming majority of Israelis have served in the army or have done national service, have served their country in some meaningful way at a very critical and pivotal point in their lives. So I'll just give you an example. I mean, we had a ceremony on Erev Yom HaZikaron, the night before Memorial Day here. Memorial Day here is a very big deal. It is not, it's not a day of sales, and it's not a day of, this is a real deal. And it was a very sad Memorial Day here, among other reasons, because the military cemeteries were closed. And watching police talk on the news about what it was going to feel like for them to block people from getting into the cemetery, from visiting the grave of their son, was heartbreaking. It was just beyond, I mean, policemen crying and saying, how am I going to say no? But they said no. And very few people push them very hard. But normally we don't even have a shalem. We don't even have a shalem ceremony for Yom HaZikaron because our students all go home. They go back to their units. They tragically go to the cemeteries of people whose graves they need to visit. So they don't want to do a shalem thing. It's one of the times during the year where they don't need shalem to be their community. But this year they did because they couldn't go home and they couldn't go back to their units and they couldn't go to those cemeteries. And we did a thing, it looked exactly like this, right? It was Zoom and then we broke up into little smaller groups. And people told stories. These students who I thought I knew well told stories which I won't go into now, but that were just heartbreaking. And it's important to remember that these are the kids who are fine. They're not statistics. They weren't killed. They weren't wounded. They served, they came home, they got married, or they're not yet married, but they're in college. I mean, on the surface, everything's fine. And yet they carry such unbelievably painful baggage from what they saw, from what they were involved in, from what they think. There is a way in which that tapestry of pain and service, they go together, is really, I think, Yana, the critical glue that holds this country together. The people on that conversation who felt very much bound to each other were wearing kippot and were completely secular. We're ones who are, going to be in shul on a Friday night. The minute synagogues here begin to open up, which they are starting to, you're allowed 19 people. Don't ask me how we got to that number, but anyway, you're allowed 19 people in a synagogue now. And they're the ones who are never going to go to shul. In other words, they're linked really fundamentally by a national glue, a national net. Whereas in America, for a very long time, there were two senses that did that. One was history, and especially first the Holocaust, and then I think a sense of obligation to the plight of Jews in the Soviet Union and now the former Soviet Union. Those were major historical epics that linked American Jews together. And then there was a sense that, I may be Reform, I may be Orthodox, but I'm Jew by religion. And what I think you all know better than I, because you track these numbers more than I do, is that, first of all, the number of Jews who see themselves as Jews by religion, no matter what kind of religion, is decreasing rapidly. An increasing number of young Jews, especially in their 20s and 30s, see themselves as Jews not by religion and not by people, but by culture. And I think we all understand that at the end of the day, that's very thin, right? Lox and bagels on Super Bowl Sunday is not thick enough to keep this going. Lighting Hanukkah candles here and there, or having a Seder that's more or less just a conversation, if that's all you do, is not enough to sustain this. And we all know that younger people think that, the Holocaust, or even the horrible period of Soviet Jewry and the extraordinary miracle of bringing many Soviet Jews to freedom in Israel and America and in other places, that for these young kids is also ancient history. I mean, you can actually see among many Americans, sort of on the left side of the Democratic Party, embracing socialism as if there was no history of socialism going any bit awry. There's just no aware, we kind of tried that. And in some parts of the world, it didn't really work out all that great. If you want to say, okay, I know that and I understand that, but here's why I think we can do it better. Okay. I mean, that's an interesting conversation to have, but that's not their conversation. Their conversation, it's a great idea. I just read Marx and Lenin and it sounds awesome. There's really a kind of a non-historical attitude among a lot of the American young people, so that with religion taking a backseat and with history taking a backseat, I think the real challenge in young American Jewish life is going to be, what's that glue that holds us together? So among the generation of many of us on this call, and we span a couple of generations, but mostly not that much younger generation, among the generations of people on this call, many of us still feel that in some way, some part of religious organizational Jewish life is some part of what we care about. We understand the profundity of the importance of history. I think so for us, it continues to work, but the question is really what's going to be in the next generation. And I know that Yana, you and your own work and many of the people on this call in their work are really trying to address that. So that's what I think the difference is. Israelis are still called upon to go defend this thing that binds them together. And even when, thank God, they come back home whole in body and whole in spirit, they carry with themselves some stuff that they carry for the rest of their lives. And that is a magnet to this place in a way that no community outside Israel, this is not about American Jews specifically, but no community outside Israel has really been able to perpetuate. And of course, we talked about this last time I got together with you in November, and it's in the book, but Israel is a very particularist society. You know, Israelis have no problem saying this is a country, so to speak, of the Jews, by the Jews, and for the Jews. Of course, we have 10% Arabs, minority, who have to have complete, absolute equal rights. And of course, we have people who are not Jews who have to have equal rights, even if they're not Arabs and so forth. But fundamentally, this is a Jewish project. Whereas in America, increasingly, America is seen as a fundamentally universal project. To its great credit, right? It doesn't matter what your background, what your nationality, what your ethnicity, what the color of your skin. That's all wonderful. That's what made America home for all of us, including me, because my grandmother came from the Ukraine, you know, maybe a little bit before some of you did, but, you know, not that much more before. So we've all been blessed by being taken in by a country which didn't see that ethnic piece as being a boundary. But what we're discovering, of course, in America is that the absence of that ethnic piece is making continuation of Jewish allegiance a very, very, very serious challenge. So, you know, we have our challenges, you have your challenges, and that's why I said before, we need to bridge and help each other think it through, not dish out across the ocean criticisms of one to the other, because we can do much better for each other.
Thanks, Danny. I want to stay on this subject a little bit more about the relationship between American Jews and Israeli Jews, because that's a source of a tremendous amount of concern, tension, and a parting of the ways that is undeniable. So I want to ask on the issue of U.S.-Israel relationship and the differences and what we can do, share a few other questions that I've gotten from people, because clearly it's on everybody's mind.
Sure. Sure.
Marina Tickman, you had a question?
Yes. Hi, Danny. Great to see you again.
See you too.
Well, it might sound repetitive. You talked a lot about the differences in terms of the leadership, but the question I have is, what can we learn from the way U.S. leadership and Israeli leadership are handling the crisis? That's a very important question, especially in our case. We get a lot of conflicted messages every single day. And a lot of people are asking those questions. Can you maybe say a few more words for all of us?
Sure, I'll try. I'm sure there's people out there that are much more expert in this. And I don't want to do, you know, the old, the Israeli view of American politics. I'll stay far away from that. And you all have your political views, and that's all fine. But here's what I will say. It's very important, and this I've been teaching to our students even online. You know, our students need to understand that America is a federal system. I mean, you all know that, but, you know, not all of our students understood that before. America is really the United States, right? And the states are all taking very different approaches. And so obviously when a BB gets online on the TV at night and says, okay, we're shutting down all the highways tomorrow, or not tomorrow, it gives you a few days notice, but we're shutting down all the highways, or you may not leave your homes on the Seder night. I'm not talking about how many people can get together for a Seder. You may not leave your home, and there will be patrol people and soldiers out on the streets to make sure. That's it. That's the law of the entire country, from the Golan down to Eilat. That's the law. We're obviously in America, you have 50 different states who have 50 different policies, and because the American law pretty much guarantees interstate travel, you know, no matter what's going on in New Jersey, you have a right to leave New Jersey and to drive to wherever you want to go. So it's obviously just constitutionally, it's much more difficult to do what Israel did. But one book that I read that I want to encourage you to read, even though I'm sure that the author of this book is not telling her audiences to read my book, I will still encourage you to read her book. She's brilliant, and her name is Jill Lepore, L-E-P-O-R-E. She's a professor at Harvard. Harvard is considered a very good school. It's in a city called Boston. And she wrote a book called These Truths. It's big, like, I don't know, 700, 800 pages. It's a one-volume history of the United States. There's a bunch of those that are out there. It's the newest one. It's by far the best. It's an extraordinary book. But towards the end, she starts all the way back with slavery before the country, all that. It's very balanced. It's a middle-of-the-road book. It's not a left-wing book, not a right-wing book. But she does look at this whole question sort of, what happened to Americans' trust in facts and in science? Like when I was growing up in America, there were 3 TV stations. There was ABC, NBC, and CBS. One was Dan Rather, one was Tom Brokaw, and one was, I think, Sam Donaldson, if I remember correctly, but I could be wrong about that one. But they were all white men in suits and ties on black and white TVs on the kitchen counter. And that's what we all watched every night at dinner. We watched the news. Now, it didn't really matter which channel you were watching. You more or less got exactly the same information. You liked, Dan Rather or whoever it was better, so you watched CBS if you liked Dan Rather better. But if you watched NBC, you got exactly the same story. Americans were all given the same basic set of facts, and Americans trusted the media to give them those facts. There's two major institutions that Americans don't trust anymore. One is the media, and one is the academy. What happened? And Jill Lepore makes a very interesting argument, I think. She argues that it was the American left in the 1960s that destroyed the believability of the academy, because in the 60s there were all these kinds of crazy experiments of LSD, and then people arguing that what you saw and understood and wrote about under LSD had a truth that other kinds of research didn't have. It was nuts, but it began to erode Americans' faith in the reliability of the academy. And that what she argues was the right in America, especially with phenomena like Fox and other right-wing talk show hosts, where the facts were kind of loosey-goosey, that eroded Americans' reliance on the media. So she argues that America finds itself now in a world in which nobody really trusts, or many people don't really trust science, and many people don't really trust the media. So I actually have taken a great interest, like the morning after Fauci, goes online and gives this whole Senate testimony like you did a few days ago. When I wake up the next morning, I immediately go on the New York Times, and then just for entertainment's sake, I'm interested in really how's the Wall Street Journal and how is Fox News showing exactly the same thing. And literally, it looks like it's different countries. It just looks like different countries. When Fauci said that he thought it was going to be very dangerous to go back to school in the fall, the New York Times put that front and center. And then Fox News, you had to scroll all the way down to find something, and it was really kind of watered down. I'm not taking a stand here on which side is right. That's for each of you to make your own view. But my point is, if you look at the Israeli press, you look at Haaretz, which is very left, and you look at Makor Rishon, which is pretty right, the facts in the newspapers are essentially the same. Where people disagree is in the opinion section. But Israelis still do trust science. Israelis still do trust the academy. And I'll say here, one difference between Bibi and Donald, everybody talks about how similar Bibi and Donald Trump are. People have been saying this for years already. It's just not true. In other words, Bibi is a voracious reader. Bibi takes data very seriously. He sits all day long and pores over numbers. He spends all day long on the phone with epidemiologists in Germany and epidemiologists in Israel and epidemiologists in America. Israeli officials walk around and they're in masks. There's no, everybody else should be in a mask, but I'm not going to be in a mask. There's just none of that. So I think Israelis took science much more seriously. And so a combination of trusting the media and trusting science has been part of the glue that's held Israel together. And that's a challenge that America is going to have to figure out in the coming decades when it assesses what the cost of not having that shared belief in science and media has been for America.
Yeah, in America, we're looking for, we're waiting for like FDR or even Winston Churchill. And we have Donald Trump. It's creating a little bit of a problem in terms of.
Right, and you have Boris Johnson too. Whatever.
So we're looking for leadership, but we have to look to ourselves too. I have a question on the issue of the U.S.-Israel relationship. I think from Luba. Luba, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Anita. Danny, we Jews from former Soviet Union have unconditional love for Israel. American-born Jews are clearly divided. We see that in America. You know it better than we. You're expert on that subject. It seems like they're divided in their love and connection and support of Israel. What should we, leadership, do to strengthen that connection between American and Israeli Jews?
That's a great question. That's a really great question, Luba. Thank you for it. So I'll tell you a story. That's how Jews talk, right? So a certain community that will remain nameless, but it's in the United States, and it's a well-regarded Jewish community. A few people, lay leaders from the community, I don't know, got in touch 6 weeks ago. I was already in lockdown, so it was. They got in touch and they said, we have a problem that our graduating high school seniors are going off to college, which of course now they might not be, but they felt they were going to be. They're going to go off to college and they're going to encounter on the campus all this kind of stuff, and they're really not prepared to answer anything about what they're going to hear from Palestinians or left-wing people about Israel and so on and so forth. We want to prepare our kids to go off to college in order so that they can engage in the conversation. And so we want to teach them about Israel and about the conflict and yada, yada, yada. And would you put together some sort of curriculum and maybe teach it and whatever? Okay, so that's something that's probably worth doing. And I said to them, how much time do we have to work with? Like, how much time can I have with them? And I was expecting them to say, you know, you can have it. We'll do a 2-day seminar. We'll, you know, I don't know, 5 nights, whatever the case may be. And they said, well, we can't decide if it should be 45 minutes or an hour and a half. And I kind of chuckled and I thought to myself, you know, seriously, and here's what I said to them. This is what I actually really did say. Your kids have taken AP American history. They understand that if you want to understand something seriously, you do it at the AP level, and that takes hundreds and hundreds of hours of hard work. Why do you think you're communicating anything to them about the substance and meaningfulness and nuance of Jewish life or Israeli life if it can be done in 45 minutes? I mean, what that is worth anything can be done in 45 minutes. And I basically said, you know, very nicely and smiling and all that. But I said, if you're going to do it in 45 minutes or in an hour and a half, I mean, you're welcome to do it. I don't want any part of it because it's just a joke. It's not serious. Now, where we ended up, I think, we haven't finalized it, but I think they're going to do an 8-hour course, 4 video sessions on the history of Israel and 4 video sessions on sort of the history of Zionist ideas. And then in the middle of that, we'll look at the conflict, because what happens is when we talk about the conflict only, and we never talk about why did Jews get into the state making business? What has happened to the Jewish people by virtue of its having a state? In what ways has Jewish life flourished in Israel? You know, in ways that it can't flourish anywhere else, and so on and so forth. If you talk only about the conflict, it's like saying, I want to tell you how amazing America is, and then talk about the War of Independence, 1812, Civil War, First World War, Second World War, Vietnam War, Korea War, and Afghanistan War. See how amazing America is? That's not what's amazing about America. What's amazing about America is the freedoms that it gives people and the new lives that it gives people and the economic opportunity that it gives people. And you're not going to learn any of that if you talk about America through the lens of only its wars. But what we do in America too often is talk about Israel only through the lens of its conflict. We've got to stop that. And I think what we have to do is we have to give people much more robust Jewish educations. What we did over the course of years to make it, to lower the bar to people getting in, was say, okay, it won't be 5 days a week, it'll be 3 days a week. And it won't be 3 days a week, it'll be 2 days a week. And it won't be this, it'll be that. We'll make it entertainment rather than education. The Jews have never done that before successfully. The Jews have never succeeded in replicating Jewish life for subsequent Jewish generations without very serious, intensive Jewish education and learning, right? And by the way, this is what the Soviet government understood. If you want to try to destroy the Jewish people, make Jewish education illegal. Now, they didn't succeed. You're all proof of the fact that they didn't succeed. But had it gone on for another couple of generations, they might have succeeded. They really might have. In 70 years, they couldn't have. But basically what we've known, what we've learned, I mean, the same reason, by the way, the Nazis were smart. They burned Jewish books. Why did they do that? Because it was a symbol of what kept Jews going. Jews have never been about just making the world a better place, because Christians make the world a better place, because atheists make the world a better place, Buddhists make the world a better place, lots of Muslims make the world a better place. We don't have a monopoly on being good human beings, and we don't want that monopoly. When Anita pointed out before that JFCS is working with clergy leadership and religious leadership and lots of other communities, that's because we take them seriously, and we think their communities are also worthy and worth learning from and worth working with. What's made us special is that we have a particular take on the world. We have a particular way of seeing things. We have a particular set of attitudes and visions, not better, not worse, just different, that we bring to bear on the notions of family, the notions of community, the notions of loyalty, the conceptions of time, conceptions of place, peoplehood, and so on and so forth. And the great tragedy of the American Jewish community writ large, and I'm not in any way now talking about the Bay Area, but from New York to Los Angeles, the whole thing. You can take even kids who've gone for 12 years to excellent day school and ask them, tell me something about the way in which a Jewish sense of peoplehood is different from an American sense of peoplehood, and they're going to stare at you. They don't know. And that's not their fault, that's our fault. So I think, Luba, fundamentally, our response has to be a back to basics, very rigorous Jewish education. And look, we're facing tremendous challenges. Us here in Israel and you in America, we're going to face some very tough financial times coming up right now. We all understand that. And it may seem, and obviously poverty, hunger, those are all critical issues, and nobody can be allowed to be without a roof, and nobody can have their kids go to sleep hungry and all of that. But even in these very trying times economically in America, even in these times, there is still an amazing amount of wealth in the American Jewish community. And even if it's X% less than it was 4 months ago, it's still a huge amount of potential. We don't, at the end of the day, have to choose between taking care of those people who are hungry and homeless or unemployed on the one hand, and giving our community excellent Jewish education. Precisely the opposite. You have all seen, I'm sure, that more people are logging on to synagogue services in America over Zoom than were going in person before the crisis. Now, part of that is because it's easier. You have to put on a nice shirt, but you can be wearing gym shorts, or you can be wearing slippers, or whatever the case may be, and it's all good. Okay, so part of it is logistics. It's just easier. You don't have to get all dressed up and get in the car and go find parking and all that. Part of it is, though, people are really hungry for community. And that hunger for community is going to be ongoing. It's not going to end when the curve flattens. People are going to be feeling the repercussions of this for a very long time. And that's exactly the moment at which we could say, you're part of something unbelievable that is stuck together through thick and thin. The Jewish people were around in the Spanish plague and are still around. The Jewish people were an old people by the time of the bubonic plague and were still around. The Talmud talks about massive plagues that went through the land of Israel and were still around. Why? Because at the end of the day, even after those Talmudic plagues and the bubonic plague and the Spanish plague and COVID-19, we always reverted back to basics. We created a sense of mutual responsibility through teaching the fundamentals of Jewish life in a rigorous kind of a way. And I'll say, honestly, with pain, I think that American Jewish life for a very long time has thought that you could make it light and fluffy and get people to, invest in that. But nothing that's light and fluffy is worth all that much. Light and fluffy business plans don't result in serious businesses. And light and fluffy marriages aren't enduring relationships. And light and fluffy parenting doesn't raise decent human beings. And nobody wants light and fluffy. They don't want to get into Harvard because it's light and fluffy, or MIT or Princeton or wherever. They want to get into those schools because they're the exact opposite, because they drive you really hard and they make you think really hard and they make you work. At the end of the day, we understand that quality comes from incredibly hard work and incredibly deep learning. And we've thought that somehow we could give ourselves as Jews a pass on that, and we're finding out that we can't. And the point that Luba's making is exactly that. When you give them light and fluffy and not very much substance, at a certain point, people begin to say, who needs it? And if I'm not sure that I need the whole Jewish thing in general, then what do I need the Jewish people state thing for? Right? It's not an anti-Israel thing. It's much less that than it is just not knowing why in the world I should care. I mean, that's the result of the educational system we created. It's not their fault. It's our generation's fault.
Right.
And it's never too late to rebuild this. We can start tomorrow.
That's our big challenge is with the next generation, because many of them just can't answer the question about why be Jewish. And our job as a Jewish community is to maintain a Jewish community and help people find meaning in being involved in the community, in serving others, in learning, and in understanding our story. But there's an issue on the on the Israeli side too, and I'd like to ask that question, and then I'd like to pivot before we end to I have a number of political questions here too.
Sure.
We're talking about how to deal with Americans, or younger Americans especially, but more and more Americans not particularly feeling identified with Israel, distancing themselves from Israel in some way. Not everyone. There's still a very strong support, but many people are feeling distant. On the Israeli side, how do Israelis feel about American Jews, and do they feel that we're one people?
It's a great, important question. I'll answer it very quickly. Israeli Jews, like American Jews, don't know nearly enough about the other side. They just don't. And if they come to America, believe me, checking out the American Jewish community is not high on their list. They want to go to the Grand Canyon. They want to see El Capitan. They want to go to New York, whatever. Israel has failed in its educational system of teaching Israeli Jews about America and the extraordinary success that American Jewish life has been for a very long time. Now, Anita, you know that at Shalem, we take that exceedingly seriously. And we're even using COVID as an opportunity to teach people more about America. And we send out pretty much every day on this WhatsApp group that we send out pieces from the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, other kinds of things about federalism and the different ways in which America is grappling with it and what's happening to religious communities in America, not only Jewish. We're trying, even at this moment, to teach our students about America and American Jewish life. But Israelis just don't know enough about America. They don't know anything about the challenge that America, the blessing of America was the welcoming of Jews into the American community. But the cost of that was when Woodrow Wilson said, "But no other national attachments." And American Jews have actually navigated that challenge, I think, incredibly impressively. And they've been both deeply committed Americans and deeply committed Zionists, but it's not always been easy. And Israelis have no idea about that. So just in the same way that I think Americans and American Jews have very significant educational challenges, we do too. We have to teach people much more about America in general, its governmental system, its constitutional system, but also about the American Jewish community. I think Israelis are starting to recognize that, but we have a long, long way to go.
Thanks. And so now I'd like to just pivot, because one of the other areas that's creating a lot of tension and difficulty politically right now has to do with the political situation in this country and what's happening in Israel. And so I have some questions about what's happening in the Middle East. And I'd like to ask, is David there? David Kachko? Could you ask, do you have a question on this, David? Is David there?
Yes. Oh, how do I get it?
There you are.
Okay. Am I unmuted? Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
we can hear you.
Sorry about that. There are many American Jewish groups that are focused now on the potential annexation. And I know you spoke earlier about the fact that you did not think this was going to happen. I would like a little more clarification from you as to why you think it will not happen. It just seems that with the Trump plan looking favorably on Israeli, I know it's not called annexation, it's called applying Israeli law sovereignty on portions of the territories. As long as it's done in conjunction with the United States, they will look favorably upon it. And it seems like there is an agreement already in the unity government to make that happen at a certain point. And it seems like there would be a lot of pressure from right-wing groups in Israel to make that happen. So I was hoping you could discuss a little bit why you think it might not happen. And then if you happen to be wrong and it does happen, what do you think will be the ramifications?
Yeah, in the wildest imaginations, if I was wrong about something, what would that mean? I could very well be wrong. So look, according to most recent polls, 2/3 of Israelis don't think it's going to happen, and 1/2 of Israelis are opposed. So it's not nearly as overwhelmingly a popular thing here as people assume. Now, let's also, so you pointed out, David, that correctly, that this term annexation is actually the term that Israelis are not using. They're calling it applying Israeli law to parts of the territories. And as I made clear before, this is mostly about areas which are not going back no matter what. In other words, as far back as Yitzhak Rabin, Israel made it clear that the Jordan River Valley is a non-negotiable security line that's never going back. And that's part of what Israel would be, quote unquote, annexing if it did. And obviously, if you're going to have, as I said before, if you're going to have the Jordan River Valley, then you got to be able to get to it, which is why that whole swath, the belt between Jerusalem and the Dead Sea, is going to be critically important because that's the major access to it. So that's the Israelis who are in favor of it but are not crazy right wingers just say it's calling a spade in the same way that Trump moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem was not at the end of the day really a big deal because everybody knew that Jerusalem was Israel's capital. So it made sense to finally recognize that. In the same way that Trump's recognizing Israel's annexation of the Golan, which at the end of the day, not a really big deal because everybody knew that Israel had annexed the Golan and was never giving it back. Israel's never giving back this territory, people say. So this is more or less one of those things in the same continuum that is kind of just sort of recognizing reality. Now, that said, by the way, I am personally against taking the step. I am personally against applying this law to this land at this point, because I think it expends unnecessary political capital externally. In other words, even though I think that a lot of American Jews don't fully understand what it doesn't involve, I know that they care a lot about this. And since the reality on the ground isn't really going to change, I don't really see any point to do it right now. I think it's going to dramatically complicate Israel's relationship with European capitals, which we don't need right now. So I don't really see any need for that. The other reason that I think it's not going to happen is that everybody loves to talk about the Trump-Bibi bromance. They just are so similar to each other, this and that. True and not true. Yes, they have both been doing things about the press that are not okay. Yes, they have both taken pot shots at the judiciary, which are, to my view, not okay. Yes, they have a certain populist tendency, which to my view is very dangerous, not okay. All of that is exactly true. But what I think this pandemic has pointed out is that they are fundamentally radically different kinds of human beings, radically different kinds of people intellectually, radically different kinds of people when it comes to data, and therefore in large parts of the American Jewish community and in large parts of the American Israel community, even those former great proponents of Trump, I think, are much more tepid than they would have been 90 or 120 days ago. I think things have changed dramatically in the way that Israelis look at Trump. The other thing that Israelis understand that many American Jews don't necessarily keep their finger on the pulse in the same way. Obviously, we know that Trump is fickle, right? I mean, Trump could change his mind at any one point. Trump's biggest issue with Israel right now is not annexation, and it's not Iran. Trump's major issue right now, which is why Pompeo came to the Middle East 2 days ago, is China. The United States has had a long, complicated relationship with China. I mean, you all know better than I that for decades already, China has been, first of all, exerting its strength in the Far East and quite successfully became by far the major power in that part of the world, and then wanted to also become now a major or the major power internationally. And Trump has been pushing back against China since the very first day of the whole trade war business, long before the pandemic. And now, in light of Wuhan and the pandemic, China has become kind of a lightning rod for American anger and American this and American that. What Pompeo came to Israel for had nothing to do with annexation. What Pompeo came to Israel for was to tell Bibi two things in no uncertain terms. Number one, Israel has already awarded to a Chinese firm the contract for rebuilding one of our major ports. It's a multi-billion-dollar project. Israel doesn't have construction companies that size. China obviously does. And so we gave that contract to a Chinese company. The Americans are exceedingly unhappy about that because American naval ships dock in that port. And the Americans are saying, we have no idea what surveillance, electronic, technological stuff the Chinese are going to bury there. We want you to break the contract. Now, I don't know if Israel will or Israel won't, but Pompeo came to make it very clear to Israel, all of our allies in Europe and Israel and other countries are going to be measured now in terms of their relationship with the United States by, among other things, what relationships they have with China. And Israel has been reaching out to China a lot for economic and military reasons. And we, i.e. the United States, and I, Pompeo, are here to tell you, cut it out. You can't have it both ways. You cannot cozy up to China and cozy up to America at the same time. Israel is also about to build the region's largest desalination plant in a place called Palmachim, which is not too far from the beach, sort of near Rishon LeZion, more or less. A Chinese firm is bidding on that project also. And apparently, I wasn't there obviously, but Pompeo apparently told Bibi, that contract is not signed. That contract is not going to a Chinese firm. That's what the rumor is. And even the State Department said Pompeo did not go to the Middle East to talk about annexation. If Israel doesn't do what Trump wants on the China front, and it's not clear that it will, then Trump's support for Israel and annexation could disappear overnight. If Trump feels that somehow rebuilding the economy in America is going to be in any way set back by political capital that he's going to have to expend because of annexation, he will drop annexation right away. In other words, there's a lot of reasons to think that Trump is going to be much more fickle on this than he was. And he's also, by the way, said explicitly that Israel has to do at the same time, it has to get into serious negotiation with the Palestinians about a state. That's not going to happen because the Palestinians don't want to have that conversation. Don't forget, when the Palestinians came out against the Trump plan, it was Pompeo again himself who said, okay, if you don't like the plan, put something else on the table. Let's talk about it. But of course, the Palestinians have put nothing else on the table. That's not Israel's fault. That's their fault. But what it means at the end of the day, there's not going to be any real negotiation about a Palestinian state. That gives Trump at any moment the carte blanche that he needs or wants to say, I'm sorry, guys, this is not what I called for. This is not moving ahead. That's why most Israelis just don't think it's going to happen. They think that Israel's going to annoy the United States on something, whether it's China or something else. And at the end of the day, Trump is going to pull the plug. But you're right. I think, David, it could happen. I could definitely be wrong, obviously. Things could change here. But I don't think it's likely to happen now. And the other thing that I'll just remind you is that Yamina, Israel's most right-wing non-crazy party, Israel has right-wing crazy parties that have never been part of the coalition, but Yamina under Naftali Bennett, at least as of yesterday, because this is still fluid, was not going to be part of the coalition and is calling Bibi's government a left-wing government. In other words, nobody in the American Jewish community thinks that Bibi's government is a left-wing government. But Israelis are calling Bibi's government a left-wing government because people like Bennett are far to the right. And Bibi, is under tremendous pressure to annex more and to annex harder and this and that. And he may just decide to distance himself from the whole thing. So it's really very unclear how it's going to go. If it does happen, then I think Israelis have to explain to the world very clearly that there was the application of Israeli law to parts of that territory that we're never going back in any way, doesn't really matter what, and that it's going to be, I think, exceedingly important for the American Jewish community to tell Israel, we have a right not to like it. We don't have to love it. We do love Israel. We do care about Israel. We think this was a mistake. A lot of Israelis will say the same thing, but also at the same time, not to add fuel to a fire and to make sure that it remains an important issue, but not an issue over which the relationship might break up.
Well, that's exactly brings us to, I think, some of the final comments before we wrap up. That it's largely the American Jewish community that ensures support in Congress and in the administration for Israel. And I think Israel is very strong now. It has a strong military. The situation there has changed enormously. We have relationships with Sunni Arab countries we never could have dreamed of before. We have a lot of optimism about our future as a country in Israel, as a homeland of the Jewish people. But without the support of the Jewish community in America, and without the support of America, Israel has a big problem. So we have to do a lot of work to maintain a strong American Jewish community, and also to maintain support of America as a country, and of the Congress and the administration for Israel, in order for Israel to be safe and secure. So we have our work cut out for us, because our charge is to maintain a strong American Jewish community. Your charge is to maintain a strong Israel, and both of our charges together is to keep that relationship alive.
Exactly.
Strong. It's going to be hard now, because the centerpiece of most of our activities, our bridge building activities between Israel and the United States have had to do with bringing people from the United States to Israel.
Right.
We have one or two high level leadership groups coming to Israel, congressmen and legislators and Latino leadership and African American leadership and Christian leadership. That's all gone. Birthright, not going to happen.
Right.
All these trips, all the internships. A number of people had questions about that that I didn't have a chance to ask you. So we're going to have a big challenge because our main method for keeping us stitched together is going to be gone for a while,
Right.
which is the personal relationships. So all of us who are running institutions like Jewish Family and Children's Services, which is the largest one in this area, many of the other organizations in the Jewish community really have to figure out how to deepen the involvement, how to educate and make it meaningful to be involved Jewishly. But the heart of all of our work together, and you know, this is very, very pro-Israel, very deeply involved Jewish group on this call now. The heart of it has been a concept in Jewish philosophy, Jewish religion, called Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh Bazeh. Would you comment on that a little bit and why that deep, deep historical, philosophical, religious concept gives meaning to us right now as we end this conversation together?
Sure. Thank you for that, Anita. Yeah, the phrase "Kol Yisrael Arivim Zeh Bazeh" means that all Jews are responsible for one another. And, you know, I mean, we can all think of examples of that. And I'll give you three, and then I'll tell you why COVID is a challenge to it. But 1967, one of my earliest Jewish memories, I was 8 years old. I'll spare you the math. I'm 60. You don't have to bother calculating it. In 1967, one of my earliest memories is the outpouring of support for Israel in Baltimore, and Baltimoreans gathering together at big open spaces. And my father being on the phone, my father was a doctor, being on the phone with the Israeli embassy, trying to arrange to go over to Israel to serve. Now, the truth is, the army was faster than the embassy. By the time the embassy got him approval, the war was over. So he ended up not going. But that was a time of tremendous outpouring of Jews outside of Israel in support of Israel. Same with 1973. The Soviet Jewry movement was an example of support from both Israel and America, other places as well, but mostly Israel and America, in support of a community that was trapped behind an iron curtain, was being robbed of its liberties, and desperately wanted to be able to live its Jewish life. And we saw that as our responsibility. Now, I remember as a college kid marching for Soviet Jewry in New York, and then shortly after that, in the early 80s, going with my newly minted wife to Moscow, Kiev, and Odessa to meet with Soviet Jews. We didn't do that because we thought we were heroes. We did that because that's what Jews do. Jews help other Jews. And when there were Jews trapped in Uganda, then we had that whole period. The pandemic was a period in which Israeli Jews could not really help American Jews. There was nothing we could do. We didn't have doctors or ventilators to send over to America. And you certainly couldn't, by the way, send over ventilators and doctors and say, this is for Jews. You obviously can't do that. And a country of Israel's size couldn't make a dent, even just in the problem that New York had. But by the same token, American Jews weren't able to help Israel because America was desperate for its own resources. And I think one of the challenges here is not only the one that Anita pointed to so rightly, which is that the bridge, the air bridge, going back and forth and meeting each other has been temporarily suspended, and we don't know how long temporary is. I think part of the challenge is simply that this was very painful in a lot of ways too, because we couldn't help each other. We wanted to, but we couldn't help each other. And that's gonna make really important recapturing the point that Anita made, that what has always been the hallmark of Jewish life is that we're one people, that we don't know at the end of the day where the future of the Jewish people lies. I don't mean in 50 years or 100 years, but 500 years from now. Do we know where the future of the Jewish people is going to be? We don't. And therefore, it's our obligation to make sure that it thrives everywhere that it possibly can. And so, yeah, we're responsible one for the other. We don't have to agree with each other. We don't have to have Jews live their Jewish lives in the same way. But we absolutely, positively have to feel that we're part of the same people, that we're preserving and perpetuating the same tradition, and that more than anything else beyond our immediate families and closest friends, our responsibility is to our people, first and foremost. That is a kind of discourse that I think is increasingly uncomfortable for a younger generation, especially in the States, but not only. And we have to work very hard on that. And Anita's right. I mean, she couldn't be more right. When we lose the major bridge of us coming to you and you coming to us and us getting to know each other, we're going to have to work all that much harder to keep this engagement going. If we're limited to Zoom, then this is the time to have, you know, like we said to that other community, the time to do courses about Israel's history in a way that we've never done before. And it can be done, you know, for, you know, adults as well as for high school kids. This is time when we can learn a tremendous amount of time, when we can do bridging over the internet and so on and so forth. We can meet each other, we can talk to each other. Our students can meet your students even over Zoom, even if it's not quite as great as being together as they were at APAC again. But there is lots that we can do, and more important, there's lots that we simply must do. We have to figure out a way, even with the loss of air travel for the time being, and we have to figure out a way to inculcate in both of our societies, which comprise 90% almost of the Jewish people, Kol Yisrael Arivim Ze Bazeh. At the end of the day, our most sacred obligation is to our families and to our people. And nothing about this tumultuous time can be allowed to change any of that. I believe that we're going to see it through. I think we're going to look back on this as a period when we really did rise to new heights, and we'll model for younger generations that even with all of these bridges suspended for the time being, Jews remembered that it's Jewish loyalty to Jews that has ultimately kept the Jewish people going for thousands and thousands of years.
Thank you, Danny. I think Jews will continue to grapple with this question of Kol Yisrael Aravim Ze Bazeh, how to take care of each other, how to stay strong. We did it in caves in the Holy Land, and then we did it in little rooms in the ghetto, and then we did it in little apartments in Moscow, and now we're doing it in little Zoom rooms. But we will always be grappling with these issues, and that's part of what makes us strong. And certainly this group on this call are among those people who will continue to do that. So God bless you for your heart and your voice and your intellect, and for all the things you do to keep us stitched together and help us to understand our place in history. And thank you to everybody on this call for taking the time to learn and to grow and to grapple with these difficult questions. We have much work to do. So as we always say in San Francisco, Chazak, Chazak, Chazak v'nid hazech. Be strong, be strong, be strong, everybody, and may we strengthen each other. God bless you, everybody.